Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Randy Credico, live on the fly on the Progressive Radio Network. And today we're going to examine once again the situation in Nicaragua. And that's it. All right. I did one, Stephen Kinzer. I got some flack for it from a few people who are diehard supporters of Daniel Ortega. Me, I used to be a diehard supporter of Daniel Ortega, but I grew up. I got a little older, and I had a piece that was critical, and I agreed with Stephen Kinzer just a few weeks back. And you get lumped in as a supporter of U.S. policy in Central America, which of course is ridiculous. That's almost like just because you oppose the situation in Gaza and in the West Bank that you're an anti-Semite. That's the kind of argument that's being made against people like me because I'm critical of the current, and I don't call them the Sandinistas because I was there for 5 years back in the 80s, almost 6 years back and forth, and I did tons of benefits for the Sandinistas, and I'm proud of it. Those were probably, looking back, the greatest days of my life were those days in Nicaragua. It would be akin to being in Berlin in the 20s or in Spain in the 30s or Paris in the 30s. I don't know. But so those were the great days of my life. And I don't want to spoil what this show is about. I'm going to look different in this episode coming up after a quick break by a little music by Carlos Mejia Godoy, whose music I love. He was the guy who wrote all the Sandinista music back in the 80s and 90s. And I think he's become critical of the current government, which I don't call Sandinista. Now, I oppose U.S. policy down there, but I don't support the direction that has been taken over the last 15 years. So I've got this guy, Ron Ridenour, who I met in Nicaragua way back in the 80s. He wrote a book called Yankee Sandinistas. And I visited him in Copenhagen a few times. He's an American citizen that had moved to Copenhagen. But after I last saw him in the 80s, he moved to Cuba for 20 years. Now he's back in Copenhagen. And he has his learned opinions and thoughts about what Nicaragua was like then in the 80s and what it's like today. And it can't be dismissed. And he gets called all sorts of nasty, not names, but, like he's some kind of agent of the government because he has his opinions. He just doesn't drink the Kool-Aid and, adduce to everything that some of Ortega's supporters would like people to think. All right. So this is a very interesting interview, and I did it. The reason why I bring this up is because it was recorded yesterday, and up here in near Woodstock, and there was no electricity, so I had to drive all the way down to Kingston and find a place where I could get some data roaming. And the magic touch of our engineer, editor, Kelly Lane, we have a show here. And so I actually did it on my phone. What you're going to see is on my phone. Same hat, but a different, I'm wearing a Scotland sweatshirt in kind of a celebration of Craig Murray's release. He gave me this in Scotland way back in 2017. All right, we're drifting too much. All right, so this what you're going to see now is on a phone. I'm on a phone. Ridenour, who's in Copenhagen, is on his computer. So that's it. We're going to play some Sandinista music here, Carlos Mejia Godoy. We're going to come back, and the rest of it was recorded yesterday. And save your nasty comments for a couple of days. I'm exhausted and I'm not responding. Okay, folks, here we go. Progressive Radio Network's new show, number 2 on the Sandinistas. Here we go. See you later.
Compadre, guarda barranco, hermano de viento, de canto y de luz. Decime si en tus andanzas viste una chavala llamada Arlenciú.
Yo vi descensontle amigo, una estrella dulce en el cañaveral, saeta de mil colores, entre los rumores del pajonal.
We are back. I'm Randy Credico, Randy Credico live on the fly here on Progressive Radio Network and on our website. It's both Assange Countdown to Freedom.com or randycredico.com, also on Roku. A few weeks back, I interviewed Stephen Kinzer, who I met in Nicaragua when I was there back in the 80s. I was there for a long time. Kinzer was working for the New York Times, and he had a piece that he wrote about the elections. I had him on. We talked about it, and he was very critical of Ortega. I agreed with him on a lot of the points that he came up with based on my experiences then and what I saw recently. There was another gentleman I met there back in, I think, 1986. He had written a book called Yankee Sandinistas. He gave me a copy. Ron Ridenour, who was there for a long time, and then he and I became friends. I visited him in Copenhagen, where he lives, and he lives now. But in between, he was in Cuba. We'll talk about that a little bit. Ron Ridenour, thank you for joining me today, and it's good to see you again.
Yep, same here, Randy. It's been a long time since we had contact, and recently we've had contact again, and it's enjoyable. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, the last time I actually saw you was in '95. I was in LA, I believe. I ran into you in LA. You were living in Cuba at the time, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
So I know you read the piece on Stephen Kinzer. When I was there, as I said earlier to you, when I was there, I really enjoyed it, and I had so much hope. With what was going on then. And then when I returned in 2010, 2011, 2012, in 2009, the 50 or the 30-year anniversary, yes, of the revolution, I was very disappointed with what I saw. I got pulled over a bunch of times going to San Juan del Sur, and there was basically a one-party rule. When I criticize it, I get hammered as if I'm on the U.S. payroll. So it's a difficult road to hoe for me to criticize it without getting hammered. Your response to that?
Well, I certainly agree, Randy. In my own background, I will say that I lived 8 years in Cuba, and I worked for the government media for the first newspaper, which was a radio station, Prensa Latina, the news agency which Che Guevara started. I worked for the editorial Jose Marti. I've written 6 books on Cuba, and one was published in Cuba. And Fidel Castro has read one of them and signed his name as an autograph. So all that said, I found some things to criticize. And one of the things that no socialist or communist government has ever done since 1917 was, in fact, turn over the reins of power, especially in the workplaces, to the working class. Now, there are many reasons for that, and we don't have time to get into it. Many of these reasons, of course, is the constant U.S. and capitalist empires' attacks on every government that tries to be socialist. But many leaders and many communist parties or FSLN make mistakes. Now, when I have criticized them, sometimes this real left people say, well, I'm an enemy because, the enemy of my enemy has got to be my friend, as Mao used to say. Well, Mao Zedong invaded Vietnam right after they won the war against the United States, just to put some things in perspective. He supported Pol Pot, and they were constantly attacking Vietnam. I could go on and on with many examples. Now, Fidel Castro never tortured anybody. That's been a very clean revolution. They don't mass murder people like Stalin and Mao have done, and so forth and so on. So we have to be careful. I've been accused by some of these people of being a CIA agent. I'm 82 years old. I've been fighting against imperialism for 62 years, and nothing that comes out of the United States government, its Pentagon and the CIA, has absolutely any good to it. It's all evil. That said, evil does not start and stop in the United States. And I don't know where we want to go. If we want to go into my background with my knowledge, personal knowledge of Rosario Murillo.
Yes, I'd like, actually, let's start there, because some of the people who are her supporters, and there are very few, I mean, people that I know, whether it be Sergio Ramirez, whether it be Victor Tinoco, and many others that were in government, Alejandro Bendaña, who I knew very well. They've been critical. Some have been jailed. Some had, as in the case of Sergio Ramirez, had to leave the country. So I'd like to know, and Gioconda Belli and our friend over there, Sofia Montenegro, who was at Barricada, were critical, and they've been stymied. There's so many people that are critical, but I know a few Americans who go down there, and they were not there in the 80s. I'm not even sure if they were born in the 80s. They didn't see it then. They've just seen it now. So go ahead. Tell us about your personal experience with Rosario Murillo, who is, I think, the co-president at this point in time.
Yeah, that's what Ortega deemed her to be, although that's not an official title. Well, we'll come to the critique of Zinzer later, or Kinzer a little bit later on. We'll get into the social conditions and some of the positive things that in fact do exist in Nicaragua today. But I was a reporter from the late 60s in the United States. I was a social activist, anti-racism, anti-imperialism, etc. And I took up the pen as part of the weaponry against this. So at one point, I went to Nicaragua in '78 during the guerrilla warfare, and I interviewed several of the people who became leaders of the government, including Ernesto Cardenal, Miguel de Escoto, who became the foreign minister, Ernesto, who became the Minister of Culture, and Sergio Ramirez, who became vice president. They were in hiding, and I interviewed them. When they won, I came to Nicaragua and worked with them in '82 and '84, '85. And at some point, I was, for a few months, I was Rosario Murillo's PR person for the association she headed. That was called the Aztec, the Sandinista Cultural Workers Association. And at some point, we were on a tour in northern Nicaragua up along the border in the war zone, and I was writing about it and doing communications, and some of us were handed rifles by the military there because this was a war zone. And in one of the villages that we were entertaining civilians, and the culture group was and civilians and soldiers, and we were attacked. So I was a part of the defense of the area. Now I was very close to them. I knew Daniel Ortega personally, and I knew Thomas Borges was the Minister of Interior. I did a report for him about censorship. And, they were like, the government was like pulling out a sentence here or there of the Catholic, or rather the La Prensa newspaper, which was basically a Yankee supported paper. And, supporters of the Contras and the Catholic radio. And I said, well, instead of just, piecemealing this, one day at a time, do what the United States did during the Second World War. They forbade any, pro-fascist medium. So, this is a war. The United States is attacking you. Just, censor them entirely. Well, Borges thought it was a good idea. Ortega didn't want to do it. Ortega went in a social democratic path. You have to understand there were three major factions of the FSLN. Ortega was in charge of the Third Way. It was basically pro-social democratic. They wanted to appeal to the European social democrats and the so-called liberals of the so-called Democratic Party in Yankeelandia. And Borges was the leader of the rural proletariat faction, the prolonged warfare. And Jaime Wheelock was the leader of the proletariat, the industrial proletariat, which there were very few people in. So, they get into power and they start doing some really good things. But what happens is that Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo move into a mansion. The first they started a Consejo del Pueblo. Instead of a parliament, a Consejo del Pueblo meant the People's Council. And that was every sector, including the capitalist class, but all the workers' unions, the very strong women's movement, etc. They were on this council. And I went to many meetings. It was extremely working class oriented, and they were making decisions. Well, Ortega stopped it and started a parliament. And you could see the difference. I went to parliament meetings. You could see that it was already, like a bourgeois meeting hall, an assembly of parties, and they were, removed from the people. Of course, the FSLN then was really with the people. Any rate, what I would call right-wing reform started already before he lost the elections in 1990. One of the reasons why he lost the election was because he hired a New York PR election firm, to tell him how he should conduct his election in Nicaragua when the government of Reagan was murdering his people with these most brutal, guerrilla contras. At any rate, a lot of workers thought, he was licking up to the capitalist class. He has always supported COSEP, which is the major organization of the capitalist class, and to this day, he's very much with them. Rosario Murillo was considered an aristocratic woman. I don't think I ever met anybody that liked her. I mean, she walked around like she was superior to everybody. She didn't consult with the workers or anybody that I was working with her for some months. There was no consultation. She just gave orders. I mean, she was so authentic Sandinista that, but it's just not a question of personalities. They went already in a right-wing way. They lost the election in 1990, and then he wins again in 2006. And how do you win? In part, he got the current government to agree, which was the PCI, which has always supported the Sandinistas, even though they're conservative parties, and they were in the election this time. They got the law changed so that there was only one ballot. You didn't have a second round if you didn't get 50%. And so you could win the election with 35%, if that was the majority. And then they also, established that the Catholic Church, was the official church, and Ortega made an alliance with a Contra spokesman to be his vice president. I can't remember his name right now. I'm talking.
Obando Bravo was the guy from the church, right?
Yeah, and the bishop who became a cardinal, Obando Bravo. Yeah, he'd support him if he created, a law that all abortions, no matter what the reason, are illegal. And he defied the great strength of the women in that day. They were revolutionaries, and they were also feminists. And he just, cut them out. And that's still the same today. There's only 5 countries in the world that has a total ban against abortions. So he has a vice president that's a Contra. He's in bed with the right-wing Catholic Church's leadership. And now he's been there for 15 years. Right. And, later on, we'll get to some good things that happened or are happening and so forth and so on. But that's some background. And is there anything else here that's all that important to say? Oh, yes. The treatment of Ernesto Cardenal.
That's amazing. That's one of many treatments of a lot of people. Ernesto Cardenal, tell people who he is, what he stood for, and how much he influenced the culture, the political and social culture of Nicaragua.
Yeah, I almost, choking up over this. Ernesto Cardenal was a beautiful human being. I got to know him personally, and aside from interviewing him, When I was in Nicaragua during the Marcha, La Marcha por la Paz, I was one of the 3 coordinators of the march. We had 300 and 400 people, activists from 25 countries, supporting the Contadora process, the peace process. The Yankees were killing people in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. And in 1985, 86, we were there in this march. And my first book was going to be printed. And I got it right here. Yankee Sandinistas. This is testimonies of several U.S. Americans who worked with the Sandinistas, and it explains what they did. These were real workers and nuns. And Ernesto, Fidel Castro's signature here. Ernesto wrote a commentary which got on the book, and I just got to read a couple sentences from it. He said, "This book is about U.S.'s savage war against our tiny country, while Nicaraguans and North Americans join together and love each other more. For this reason, this book has an historical importance and touches the heart as well." I don't think Rosario has ever touched a heart. This man was also a Marxist. He was the best-selling and what was considered by many experts the best poet of Latin America. Many Nicaraguans are great poets. In fact, even Ortega tried his hand at it, and Tomas Borges was a great poet. This man in 2000, and he remained a Marxist. He was expelled. He was forbidden by the Catholic Church and in the Vatican for preaching for many years.
Well, there's a very famous picture of him, video of him and Miguel Discoto on the tarmac at Sandino Airport, I believe in 1980, when Pope John Paul came there and excoriated both of them on the tarmac for participating with the government. Right?
Okay. Where was I? In 2006, when Ortega won again, Ernesto said, I wrote this down. He said, at any rate, that the Ortega government had robbed the Sandinista revolution, had destroyed what it really. Yeah, here it is. He says that the Ortega government was a robbery of the people and a dictatorship, not a revolutionary movement. At that point, Ortega threatened to put him in jail. He died in March 1st of 2020. Now, this is after the uprising, which we're going to get to later on, I'm sure. He was, dead in a coffin in a church in Managua. His family, of course, came, and many supporters and several priests and whatnot. Sandinista thugs, so-called Sandinistas, I must say, surrounded the building in part, blocked off the front door. They beat up several people in the congregation. They desecrated Ernesto's family and his name, shouted insults and curses, beat up 5 people, and robbed some people. They finally got Ernesto out of the church through a side door or something. Now, that's the most despicable thing that you can do to a comrade.
You're desecrating the memorial or the funeral of a man who had, it was like Carlos Fonseca doing it to Carlos Fonseca, if the analogy is appropriate here, because he had such a, his influence back then brought in so many people. The Ruben Dario Theater that he opened up, I was there on opening night. Right. So he was, it's just amazing. Here a guy's 90 years old, and Ortega, what is he afraid of? Why was he so afraid of this guy?
It's revenge. It's the characteristic of a real dictator, Trump had it, right? You defy him on one thing, or you criticize him about one thing, and you're his enemy. I experienced that with Rosario. She was, I've already said enough about it. We need to go on with the more important things. But, you look at her today, and she's got rings everywhere. You know, she dresses like she's an aristocrat. Oh, I'm sorry. Stop me, Randy. Stop me.
No, I don't want to stop you because it's almost like, even though it's not the same, but how can you not make comparisons with Imelda Marcos's closet full of shoes?
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. Okay. Should we come on to some of the current issues and
the election? I want to talk about the election there and why so many people were forbidden from running, and anyone that did run was suddenly connected to the NEA, National Endowment for Democracy, NED. Anybody that ran was connected to the CIA or to some other U.S. organization. I mean, so you couldn't win.
Well,
they were either...
there's some other nuances here. And this is one of the criticisms. I have three major criticisms of Kinzer, and this is one of them. He said all of the opposition candidates were locked up. Now, this is exactly what the Yankees say, and it's not true. I give the Cam writer, Yatters, you're right, and Ben Norton of Greystone, right. They were there during the election and were part of the observers. Now, the fact is that for some reason, I don't know what, Ortega got the Supreme Electoral Council. Oh, and incidentally, all of the 10 members of the Supreme Electoral Council are, basically appointed by the FSLN. I mean, they're all FSLN people. So, I mean, they're not very objective. But they also got there can only be 6 people on the ballot. So they already had Ortega, of course, and 5 opponents. Now, all these opponent parties have been working with Ortega all these years anyway. They're conservatives to rightists, but they get along. Now, these 7 right-wing leaders who were involved in the uprising coup attempt, and it was both, they weren't party representatives. They were not presidential candidates, and that is false. They were leaders of this uprising, and in the summer of 2021, they arrested several of them. They were there, I don't know how long, in jail, some in house arrest. A couple went into exile, but they were not candidates. Now, the other candidate, I don't know how you get 75% of the election, but I can't state in any way that the election was fair or not fair. I saw a video that Ben Norton did. I read articles of them and other people, and it seems to me that it was pretty fair. I mean, but I can't really judge. It was peaceful.
I mean, how can you tell? I mean, he went on television and said that the lines were small when he was on Nicaraguan TV, state TV, and said the lines were small. And then he came back and said that's because they voted really quickly. Now, the lines were long in Honduras last week, which I find ironic that the lines were long in Honduras and a leftist won there. I don't know how she won. They allowed her to run. How come they allowed her to run in that country and Ortega didn't allow someone like Sergio Ramirez or Victor Tinoco to run?
It's a good question. I'm sorry to say I have not followed Honduras, and I don't know this woman. Many things can happen over the years. Maybe she's not all that socialistic that her enemies, want to say. Her husband, he was a capitalist, a major cattle farmer, rancher. He got into the presidency and he became more people oriented. He joined ALBA with Cuba and Venezuela, good Chavez and other, left-leaning governments. And the Yankees and the right-wing military got rid of him. Well, they didn't kill him. They ousted him. And they put in this other government, which was there until this woman, his wife, won. The fact that she was able to run is certainly, a step forward. But I can't, I don't think I can make any comparisons about this. Honduras has always been run by the United States and the United Fruit Company, which has another name today. So, it's hard to, if she's really authentic, she's going to have a hard time. There's no doubt about it. They got rid of her husband. They can always get rid of her. But
All right. So let's go back. So let's not make the comparison, but I just find it a little bit ironic that they weren't afraid of this woman. If you take a look at her platform, it was very far left. She wants to open up relations with China. And Ortega just took $100 million from Taiwan, by the way. Taiwan just gave the country $100 million. That's on top of an IMF loan. Who takes money from the IMF that's to the left in government? Cuba doesn't. Venezuela doesn't.
No. Well, that's something I didn't know. But, also, I mean, thinking of China, hey, the real China, they've got some millionaires, but billionaires, what do you call it? Billionaires. I mean, there's a very capitalist economy there. And one of them, invested billions of dollars in this oceanic water canal back in, 2013 or something. They got stopped in 2017, 18. So the China government has also been supporting Ortega's government. So I don't know, maybe he's playing, one against, like one of the things that Zinsser said is certainly clear. There's no ideology in that government, in those two individuals. They're opportunists, they're elitist. They've done some good things. I hope we get into that. But some of the good things they've done were started already in the first Sandinista government.
Let me ask you this: they have the term the Sandinistas? Is this the Sandinistas? Is it something that Sandino would recognize? That would be something that he would be proud of in his name? The present Sandinista party?
Well, it's hard to speculate, but from what we know of Sandino, I would say no. I would say no.
Okay. So, but if he said
but
no, he opposed the government of Nicaragua in 1933, but at the same time was fighting against the U.S. Just because he opposed the government of Nicaragua in 1933 didn't make him a U.S. agent. He fought against both fronts.
Yeah. What can I say? I mean, the U.S. hasn't, before 2018, and we have to get into that at some point, before that uprising, coup attempt, it was both. Ortega, made compromises with the Yankees. I mean, COSEP is the equivalent to what do you call it in the United States? The Association of Capitalists, whatever. And he has no problem with capitalism. In fact, there's not socialism in Nicaragua. We have to get into the social conditions. The economy is run by capitalists. The two major industries are tourism, which in the long run, anywhere in the world, ends up, if it gets too big, it gets up to be, regressive. It gets up to be many problems. Revolutionary consciousness fades. It hurts the nature. People get too dependent on the foreign dollar coming in. And then there's the money crops, cotton and coffee. And those are the major exports and the major incomes. And of course, we know that, one crop or two crop nations are fatal. So they're not putting enough, emphasis and support, economic support into enough food for the people, and enough of production of other items. And the economy is not socialist. It's capitalist. The first government in July of '79 already made laws for tax supported, state supported with taxes, education and free education, so to call it, and good, and healthcare. Well, practically every government, major capitalist government and pro-Yankee government and NATO government in Europe does the same. I mean, many governments that are capitalist around the world have much better healthcare and education than Yankeelandia, which is totally right wing. And who the fuck is the United States to tell anybody that what is moral or what is democratic? The United States has never had a democratic election. 49.999% of the people have nothing to say. It's winner take all from day one. You know, the Declaration of Independence,
And I
we're all
agree with
equal.
that. Ron, I got to take a quick break here, a little music break, and we'll continue on the other side. This is by Carlos Mejia Godoy. We'll be right back with writer, journalist, author Ron Ridenour right after this quick break.
Vendrá la guerra, amor, y en el combate no habrá tregua ni freno para el canto, sino poesía haciendo incontenible del cañón de fusiles libertarios. Vendrá la guerra, amor, y en el combate nos fundiremos en las barricadas, deteniendo las hordas criminales a punta de corazón, fuego y metralla, cavando sudorosos el futuro en las faldas de la paz. Aquí están los cachorros de Sandino. ¡Vámonos! No pasarán, los venceremos, amor, no pasará.
That was Carlos Mejia Godoy. I'm Randy Credico live on the fly here on the Progressive Radio Network. We've been speaking with Ron Ridenour, who wrote a fascinating book called Yankee Sandinistas. And that's the subject today. We're talking about the Sandinistas then and the Sandinistas now and the conditions in Nicaragua. And neither one of us, I can tell you for sure, are on the arm of any organization belonging to the U.S. government. We are critics in our own way, different, viewpoints, but we're objective critics. And we've both been there. We've both seen it. There are a lot of people who criticize us for making objective criticism of the current government, but they weren't there, the ones that I know, in the 80s. So I wanted someone to counter what Steve Kinzer said a few weeks back. But Ron, you agree with some of what he said, and you disagree with some of it. So let's go back to that column that Steve, or his interview with me, what you agreed with and what you disagreed with.
Good point. The fact is, he basically, just did not deal with any progress in Nicaragua. He just said that, it's the second poorest country in Latin America. The worst is Guatemala. But there's different ways of judging, poverty. And I think that, to be balanced, to be objective, which I'm also asking real left journalists who seem to find nothing wrong with the Nicaraguan government, to be objective about it and not just praise it. So one of the things that have happened that Kinzer couldn't figure out is that the tax-supported healthcare and education has been a part of the SLM program since the beginning. And Ortega, since 2006, has continued it to some degree. Let's get into some facts. Nicaragua, in fact, places 5th in the world behind 4 very rich Nordic countries, where I live, in gender equality. 40% of the parliament people are women. Single women household, they get certain economic support. There's more water, sewage, toilets, some state aid to housing. They've legalized homosexuality in 2017. That's not easy to do in Latin America. Infant mortality has fallen from 58 per 1,000 in 1990 when Ortega left, and now is down to 14. The reduction in malnutrition from 55% is now around 20%. So there have been some.
Now, wait a second, Ron, I got to stop you. Now, this is since he took over in 2006. Or are you talking about when he left in 1990?
I'm talking about after 1990. As I'm saying, I gave you some figures that were 1990. And now,
Okay.
since 2006, there have been these improvements.
Okay.
Okay. But real, extreme poverty is still existing. I mean, there's various figures. I've read UN figures. I've read various figures in the last 2 or 3 days doing research here. And it's anywhere from 30 to 37% live in poverty. In 1990, it was 48%. So poverty's decreased somewhat in Ortega's time. Now, some of the negative aspects, though, about social,
There was a 16-year gap where he wasn't president. What you're citing in 1990, did it increase after that, and then he brought it down in 2006, or was it starting to slide in 1990?
it's a damn good question. I don't have the figure, but I do know when I read it, I didn't write that down, but I do know since 2006, those two things have in fact improved. That is to say, there is less malnutrition, and certainly infant mortality has decreased since 2006. But it's a good point.
What about the abortion? You say there are 40% women in the assembly. Are they anti-abortionists?
I don't know. I don't know. All I know is if you check this up about gender equality, which I did in 2 or 3 different websites, I mean, in FN, United Nations figures, for, amazingly to me, Nicaragua is number 5th in the world. So
when you say gender equality, they certainly do not have control over their own bodies.
That's right. And that's a very good point. And I don't know how the United Nations comes to the determination they came to. But, when we cite figures, we almost always use some things from United Nations organizations. And that's what I'm doing. It's a good critique. Now, some of the negative aspects, and they've done pretty well with the coronavirus, in fact. The indigenous peoples and many Black people in residential areas were not consulted at all about this foolish oceanic water project that existed from about 2013 to 2018. It was financed by some Chinese, billionaire, and China government wanted it too, but they lost a lot of money, and now it's on hold. It's probably not going to happen. Had it happened, nobody in the area that would have been blown away. I mean, they would have removed more land than any other project in the history of the world. They would have destroyed dozens of fauna species and flora species. The people in those areas were not consulted. So that was clearly an authoritarian, anti-democratic decision. But, it's not working now. Nicaragua is still, I've already said that. Here it is. There's the figure. Poverty in 2006, when Ortega took power, was 48%. And now it's down to either 30 or up to 37%. So it has fallen down. Now, another big problem is this, the 2 major incomes is tourism and export crops, cash crops, cotton and coffee. So this is not good for the entire health of the country. It's a capitalist government, it's capitalist run economy. They're not investing in different products and different industries. And there's too much influence on tourism, which always fucks up countries. So those are some of the social conditions aspects, which I think Kinzer, didn't look into. And of course, all of the US and Lackeyes, ignore. I don't know if you want to get into the uprising, but
yeah, let's talk about the uprising. I want to talk about what happened at the UCA when students were fired at because the people who support Ortega, who drunk the Kool-Aid, say that the whole thing was a CIA or State Department engineered rebellion there at UCA. What is your analysis of it?
Well, I must admit, I mean, when we talked a week ago, I knew almost nothing. And I must say again that these radical journalists who have been in Nicaragua, including this guy from CAM, Covert Action Magazine, he was there during the uprising. So I've read what they've had to say, and I have to, respect. I mean, they're not writing falsely, but they may want to, over enthusiastically support the so-called Sandinista government. I don't call it a Sandinista government any longer. In fact, I'll say that Bayardi Arce, who was one of the original 9 commanders of the FSLN, he was with the Thomas Borge group, and he's still, active, and he's still, with the FSLN. He said that the police certainly lost control. Other people have somebody I think that we need to respect to some degree, the current, United Nations General Secretary, who certainly comes at loggerheads with the fucking Yankees. And, the term I have for the United States is this: the United States of America racist military empire. If an acronym is U.S. Army. So, when you oppose them and you're in, some power like the United Nations, which doesn't have that much power, I must admit, when he says that the FSLN was using high repression against the protesters and coup attempt makers, we have to take that into consideration. I wasn't on the ground, and I don't think I'm influenced by the Yankee propaganda media, but what I have been able to ascertain is that the first protesters in April of 2018 were mainly senior citizens and some youth, many of them university students. They were not armed, they were not doing violence, and they protested this so-called reform that Ortega set in to raise taxes and to decrease pensions. Well, of course, if you're in the working class and if you're poor, you're going to oppose that. So, he didn't want any opposition. Ortega and his wife do not accept any opposition, period. So they sicked out the police and some Sandinista activists, and they did some beatings and they did some killings. And I don't know, but, in the beginning, it seems quite clear that the protesters were not killing the police. Now, I've seen some videos, I've seen pictures, still pictures of, and I've seen before I get into that, about a week after this started, I must give Ortega his due. He withdrew that reform. He saw that there was so much popular opposition that he stopped that. Then I think that people who wanted a coup, who were being paid by the United States, this U.S. aid and this endowment of so-called democracy, which Reagan started, took, instead of having it directly come from the CIA, now it's public. And they're sending money wherever in the world that they want to help, coups. And just imagine if Russia really was spending money in the United States to overthrow Trump or overthrow Bin or overthrow whomever. If you took money from them, they'd throw you in jail immediately. So, some of these opposition leaders who were taking money, you legitimately can be thrown in jail. I don't oppose that at all. But you can't have, the army was involved, the police were involved, sometimes armed so-called Sandinista activists were involved. They certainly killed the majority of the 330 people that were killed over, a year's time, a year period, most in the first 3 months. There was extreme overreaction. And then, some of these people who did want the end of Ortega Murillo and who were armed violently. I saw some of the weapons. They were pistols. They were almost homemade mortars. You know, they could not do anything of significance against an army. Then you have to ask the question, why the hell did they risk their lives? And many of them died fighting this government. It couldn't just be that the United States was giving money to some of them. You know, I mean, you don't die for some dollars. You know, they must have had a lot of hatred and frustration and dissent of the Ortega Murillo government, which in part has to be their own fault. I think that's pretty much what I know about that uprising. I can't say much more, but I think that it's something that the real left must criticize the what I call the non-Sandinista government for. They too, you know, were over brutal, repressive, authoritarian. And I don't hear people who are doing good work in many ways, including Greystone. I don't hear them doing any criticisms. And I recall the times when, you know, if you were for communism, you had to be for Stalin. And then you had to be for Mao. And then you had to be for Pol Pot and the North Korean family dynasty. Fuck that. I mean, they are oppressors. You know, under Mao, Pol Pot came in several times and invaded North Korea right after they'd beaten the Yankees. I mean, that has to be criticized. It has to be opposed.
Right. I agree with you. Why do you think, what is it that people who will not look at Nicaragua critically, even if they support Ortega, why not be objective and point out weaknesses, and I'm using a light term, weaknesses within that governmental structure? Why? I mean, wouldn't it give you more credibility as a journalist if you would just point out, and rather than gloss over all of the not just mistakes, but you know what has been institutionalized by the Ortega family clan? And you know what? It's not easy for me to say this. You know, it breaks my heart that I, who spent all that time, I entertained for Ortega twice. I was a big supporter. I went to the mat for the guy. I mean, I spent a lot of years, as you know, I used to do my act in front of the embassy. I would travel the country with other comedians, the U.S. Out Show. I was really part of it. And it breaks my heart to see what I'm seeing right now. And I'm reluctant to be so critical of it. Because, you know, I don't want to give Aiden comfort to the United States, but I've got to call it as I see it.
Well, I know what you're talking about, brother. I mean, I've been there for about 60 years. Not too long after I started, my first demonstration was against the Bay of Pigs invasion in April of '61 in front of the federal building in Los Angeles. I joined the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. I still have my membership card. And I've been there all my life since. I'm wearing Che Guevara because I think that that Che Guevara is my inspirer. We must remember, all those who can't find critiquing the enemy of my enemy, that Che Guevara was very critical in the end of his life and gave one of the world's greatest speeches about the Soviet Union's lack of supporting liberation movements and guerrilla warfare in many countries, including throughout the Latin American country. You remember the communist parties did not support the Cuban Revolution. They did not support the Cuban Revolution during the guerrilla warfare, and nor did they in Nicaragua or any other country. So he criticized them strongly. And well, of course, Cuba and Fidel, you know, they had some problems with that critique. But I mean, that's what I think we need to do. Now, one of the positive reasons that I can come up with as to why much of the left, the real left, you know, fuck these progressives. I don't consider them leftist at all. But within the real left, there are various groupings, but almost all of us feel psychologically what's the word I want to use? I mean, we're so powerless that we feel, like we have to support whatever exists. And if somebody is against the Yankees, then you've got to support them. And I agree, you do. But at the same time, if they're not doing what we want to do, we want to create a new world. Many of these people are, instead of thinking of this new world we want to create as the major priority, they're thinking about, if I criticize Nicaragua or Stalin or Mao or whatever, then I'm going to be accused of being with the enemy. This is a disaster. And it was started, 100 years ago or more. It's like, you're either with us or against us. And if you were against them, Stalin murdered tens of thousands. He murdered 10,000 army officers before the Nazis invaded. It goes on and on and on. Now, if anybody accuses me of being a CIA officer, I'm 82 years old. Let's meet somewhere and have fisticuffs. Fuck you. You got to grow up. And I'm saying this, that there's no support, no real leftist should support any government that acts to colonize or imperialize. I'm reading now what I wrote as closing remarks. I want it to be very clear. Any government that wants to colonize, imperialize, and steal from its own people or any other people has no support whatsoever. And that includes social democrats and Democrats and so on. And since 1961, I've been an activist and written for justice for people and world peace and abolishing any economic system based upon wealth for a few. 12,000 years, 13,000 years have we had so-called civilization based upon private property. Every country, I think, in the world has had authoritarian empires, royal families. Look at this fucking bitch in England. She doesn't pay any taxes. We got one in Denmark. I mean, what the fuck is going on in these so-called democracies? With royal families, but at the same time, we can't support. And I'm not saying there's anybody that we must or must not support in Nicaragua or wherever else, but how can you support Queen Rosario Murillo? I believe that we who seek justice, real justice, equality for all with world peace, should lead our lives, including our political actions, in keeping with our vision. That means that besides opposing evil systems, we must also criticize and even oppose political party leaders and government leaders who contend that they are for what we are for, but they act contrarily. We need to be objective in our views of what is done in our name. And what is it that we want? We have to show people that fighting for socialism, real socialism, or communism, anarchism, a stateless society without authoritarian leadership, that means we begin today. And we shouldn't have so many children. We shouldn't throw away food. We should do all these things that, should be civic duties instead of wasting half of our food. How many radicals, communists are throwing away food? You shouldn't do that. All right. Ron Rinauer is now telling everybody how they got to live. And everybody out there is going to say, or many will, Ron Rinauer thinks he's Che Guevara, and he's trying to tell me how to live. Well, maybe I am. And I think that that's the role of people who want to create a better, not a better, but a real decent society. And we have to respect people like Ernesto Cardenal and not spit on his grave, for Christ's sakes.
Right. And I say the same thing for Sergio Ramirez, who is now in exile in Spain because Ortega I was with him, by the way. I was with him when there were 3 Germans that were killed, aid workers up in Matagalpa, and he was up there with Victor Tinoco delivering the eulogy. And right now, he was a great writer. You say, what's his name? Ernesto Cardenal, one of the great poets. Well, Sergio Ramirez, along with Gioconda Belli, two great writers. Both of them are basically in exile. But Sergio is in Spain. He's got an arrest warrant for him. And I believe that Gioconda is going to go to Spain too and not return to Nicaragua. That's a sad state of affairs as far as I'm concerned. And I think people should, look at that and say they're not government agents. They helped build that society in Nicaragua. And what we saw in the 80s, Ron, there was a lot of hope. There was a lot of spirit back then. And I got to tell you something. Right now, I don't recognize the place. I've been there. I do not recognize Nicaragua as vis-a-vis what I saw in the 80s. And I don't see it going back to that. At any rate, Ron Ridenour, thank you very much. It's been a really wonderful conversation with you, and very enlightening, informative, and galvanizing. You got the spirit still, and I want to say I'm going to go out here with another Carlos. A lot of Carlos Mejia Godoy and Luis Mejia Godoy. This is Nicaragua, Nicarita, and it's a live performance by them back in the 80s. I'm Randy Credico. You've been listening to Randy Credico Live on the Fly here on the Progressive Radio Network. We'll see you next week. Goodbye, everybody.
Viva la revolución.
Nicaragua, Nicaragüita. Este es el pueblo de Nicaragua, la flor más linda de mi querer. Abonada con la bendita Nicaragüita, sangre de Viriángel. Ay, Nicaragua, sos más dulcita. Creciéndose. Que la pielita de Tamagá. Pero ahora que ya son libre, Nicaragüita, yo te quiero mucho más. Pero ahora que ya sos libre, Nicaragüita, yo te quiero mucho más. Que lo oiga el imperialismo.